we are committed to particularly concentrate on all the banking sector. And that is why we have chosen the subject like challenges before the cooperative banking sector of the country for today's discussion. Now, we all know that so far as the cooperative societies and cooperative banks are concerned, we have had a history of 118 years. In 1904, a cooperative society was formed. After that, many developments have taken place, many changes have also taken place in the country. And we all understand that by way of these cooperatives, particularly the role and usefulness of these cooperative societies and cooperative banks, particularly in the financing of the small traders, low and middle class workers, artisans, women, disadvantaged sections of the society. This particular cooperative sector and cooperative banking sector has also got some importance. And we all understand that when taking all scheduled commercial banks, when the number is 45, that is the public sector banks, private banks, domestic private banks, and small finance banks. These comprising of 45, then the scheduled number of the state cooperative, urban cooperative banks is 53. So by way of this, the cooperative banking sector has given immense importance in the country. But we all know since the policy of the liberalization in 1990s and licensing and entry of the private sector banking, and of course differentiated banks like payments bank and small finance banks, some additional challenges are being faced by the cooperative banks, and particularly during the recent years, during the days of the demonetization, cooperative banking sector got a severe blow by way of some attitude of the government of India. And when the low-cost deposit and particularly marginal people were attracted to the banking services by way of Prime Minister Jan Dhan Yojana, then though a tremendous number of branches were operating in the urban and semi-urban and rural areas, the cooperative banks were kept out of this, this Prime Minister Jan Dhan Yojana. So by way of these moves also, the cooperative banking sector was put into a very disadvantageous situation. And now, without going into any details, now the severe challenges that are being faced by this cooperative banking sector is that many of these cooperative banks are facing business failure. Now we all understand that since quite a few months now, several banks have been put under moratorium. Even big banks like PMC Bank. Now, in the last week, also 4 cooperative banks were put in the moratorium. So there has been severe mergers in the cooperative banking sector, also putting the people into severe distress, and of course, some of the a big section of people also is losing faith on this cooperative banking sector. Secondly, in 2020, the Beer Amendment Act has been passed, particularly in the respect of the urban cooperative banks, when the state matter was particularly being taken over by the central government, when they have been advocating for quite some time to dispense with the dual control character of the cooperative banking sector. And thirdly, it is ominous for us also by the creation of the Ministry of Cooperation in the government of India, being the charge of the ministry is the Home Minister. So by way of all these, we see that some ominous signals is there for the cooperative bank. And so far as the organization is concerned, so it is not today's part of discussion, that there are some organization problems we are facing in West Bengal and Kerala, but particularly the government agencies and the political miscreants are attacking on our comrades. Secondly, there are some other problems also that we are definitely being concerned with, and some serious intervention is required on behalf of the Banking Employees Federation of India that has been under discussion in our several forums. Now, today we are particularly glad that Professor Dr. R. Ramakumar, who is the professor of Tata Institute of Sciences in Mumbai and an expert member of the Kerala Planning Board, having vast experiences on the cooperative sector, is delivering his valuable speech to us. And we are also very privileged that none other than Comrade Thomas Isaac, leader of the Left and Democratic Movement, who has been the former finance minister of government of Kerala, and particularly is a very important person to form the Kerala Bank, which has gained a huge attention, particularly when the district central cooperative bank has emerged in the state cooperative bank, creating a new era, of course, in the cooperative banking history of the country. So definitely, this webinar is very important for all who are involved in the bank employees movement. Particularly, we are very much concerned about all banking sectors as a part of the BFI. So I definitely, again, would like to thank our two guest speakers. And of course, I am very much thankful to all of the participants who have joined in today's webinar. Thank you. Over to the moderator.
Comrade, there is an announcement. Actually, the Zoom capacity is limited to 100. Comrades are advised for those who are waiting to enter to join our Facebook page. The link is given in the chat box. It is also given in the communication we have sent. So today, we are fortunate enough to have two eminent personalities among us to talk on the subject. With the kind consent of Dr. Ramakumar, I want to introduce Comrade Thomas Isaac first, because he is very busy with other engagement, and in spite of his busy schedule, he has kindly consented to address this webinar, and also he is also present amongst us. As narrated by our General Secretary, Dr. Thomas Isaac, needs no introduction. He is an eminent economist and also the Central Committee member of CPIM. For your kind information, Dr. Thomas Isaac recently took lead for mobilizing the people of Kerala for Saving Life Insurance Corporation of India. People for LIC is a very big movement launched by Comrade Thomas Isaac, including all the trade unions and also policy holders. A very big movement is offing in the state of Kerala against privatization of LIC. So, without any much introduction, I request Comrade Thomas Isaac first to address our webinar.
Comrade Devashish Chaudhary, Comrade Nandakumar, Dr. Ramakumar, comrades and friends. This may be the last of the nationalization of banks celebration. Before the denationalization process formally starts. Because government has made it a point of prestige to privatize at least two banks during the current financial year. Though the market conditions are very adverse, is the least opportune moment to have an IPO because of semi-recessionary conditions that are developing. As in the case of LIC, the government of India may stick to its agenda. It has taken more than 3 decades for the government, despite its total control, 2/3 majority in the parliament and so on, to initiate formally the process of denationalization. This is because of the stiff and heroic resistance put up by the bank employees and other mass organizations. Is also equally because of the public opinion. Public opinion still has not come to terms with the public sector banks being nationalized. And that's precisely the reason that they have been hesitating. But now I think they are going to take the plunge. Now, this is not surprising because the neoliberalism, the fundamental dictum is marketization. And for free working of the market, it is important to not to have public sector because it's market plus private property that produces the supposed efficiency under neoliberal conditions. And therefore, wherever neoliberal policies have been implemented, whether it be in Chile, US, UK, or any country in the world, the structural reforms, an important component has been privatization of public sector and also financial institutions. Now it is in this context that we are going to deliberate upon the future of the cooperative credit banks in India and in Kerala. Now, the government of India has already decided that the future is for the private commercial banks. And they are going to systematically scuttle the public sector banks. Already the public sector banks are behaving like private sector banks in terms of the market operations, the relation with claims and so on. They're forced to do so because they are operating in a market where they're competing with private sector banks. Now, having come to the conclusion that for mobilization of the saving, which is an important national task, objective, that the commercial banks are going to be, the private commercial banks are going to be the future channel. Government is systematically scuttling any other channel. We have already touched upon public sector banks, but take, for example, national savings. That has become totally unattractive, and I be sure it won't be very far off before the small savings would be closed down. Or look at the PF returns. They've brought it down, making it more unattractive. In fact, a major reform that is going on in LIC is to say differentiate between the savings component and the risk component. Now, the new policies that are being proposed by LIC are mostly just pure risk coverage policies. The idea is that if you want to save, you go to the private bank, okay? So government of India is already in the process of scuttling or eroding the alternative routes of savings. And therefore, you can imagine, you can expect what would be their attitude towards cooperative banks. Cooperative banks are not private, but they are under social control. Virtually something similar to not PSU bank, but your people are direct shareholders. But the shareholders, their voting power is not dependent upon the number of shares they own. Only one vote for one member, how much be the share they own. And therefore, it is a cooperative institution. And have no doubt, in the neoliberal perspective, that should be undermined according to the policymakers to make way for larger, more efficient, profitable private sector banks. So this is an agenda that looks almost inevitable to me, but they are also hesitating. That is one thing that you have to, because a lot of popular support. In fact, till the reform started in 1990, the cooperatives contributed to 60% of the agricultural credit. Now it has come down to 10%, agricultural institutional credit. So they plays a very important role in agriculture. Now, therefore, it has been, I wonder if government of India is toying with the idea of capturing them to use as a political institution, political instrument to expand the political influence into areas that they have not been able to spread, like Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and so on. See, this can be a very powerful political instrument. Now we get a hint of this. A separate ministry was made in the union government exclusively for cooperative. Now, according to Schedule 7 of Indian Constitution, cooperatives are the domain of the states. But no consultations have been made with the states. They went ahead and announced the union ministry. So what is the task of the union ministry for cooperatives? Well, they said the state governments control only, say, state-based multi-state cooperatives, for which you need another institution. Therefore, we are bringing the union ministry. That's what the explanation given. But how many multi-state cooperatives are there? There are so few in number, and it does not require a separate ministry at the center. So that raises a lot of doubts. What are the intentions of the central government? And now, if you look in terms of synergy, where the cooperative ministry will be located, any day I would say the agriculture. Agriculture and cooperatives are interlinked always, every time. But not agriculture. It is only the home ministry. What is home ministry to do with the cooperatives? Because Amit Shah is the union home minister who has a track record of controlling the cooperatives, capturing the cooperatives, which were in the influence of Congress in Gujarat, and deploying them for the political advantage. Therefore, there is something behind a hidden agenda in all this activity. But luckily for the states, something happened which was very unexpected and rare, which only shows that Indian judiciary is not totally under the control of the central government as they would like it to be. The Supreme Court upheld the decree of the Gujarat High Court, annulled and certain parts of 97, the constitutional amendment. And I quote Justice Narayan, there can be no doubt that our constitution has been described as quasi-federal in that, so far as legislative powers are concerned, though there is a tilt in favor of the center vis-a-vis states, given the federal supremacy principle outlined herein above, yet within their own sphere, the states have exclusive power to legislate on topics reserved exclusively to them. and cooperative is one such sector. Therefore, the Union Ministry cannot directly intervene the way they might have intended. Therefore, they are doing two things. One, they have brought in Reserve Bank of India. Now, Reserve Bank of India has already brought state cooperative banks and also urban banks directly under them, under their bank regulation statutes. Now, they would want to do something similar with the banks, if they call themselves banks. All over India, particularly states like Kerala, definitely in Kerala, that much I can tell, the banks are still known as banks. So, if the banks refuse to come under the Reserve Bank of India regulation, they would not have the right to use the term bank. You may ask, what is in there using this title bank? Now, if you lose the title bank, you can have checking accounts. You can have say, core banking system. You are out, you are finished. And you can accept deposits only from your A-class members. Now, in Kerala, for example, the banks have 60,000 crores deposits from non-A-class members. So, the RBI can entirely destroy existing banks. And now there is another instrument that central government is already started deploying in a much larger way. That is so-called Hindu banks, quote unquote. Nidhis and known by the various. They are usually normally they are just non-banking financial companies. Now, RSS is taking lead in setting up this so-called Nidhis, Hindu banks all over. And they're mobilizing money at a high rate of interest. I don't know where they can lend this money at this rate of interest. But anyway, they're doing that. Now, this Union Cooperative Ministry can directly link to this NBFCs. Because they are also, in a sense, Nidhi, a cooperative institution. And that is a deadly combination. We have, on the one hand, RBI coming down on the cooperatives. On the other hand, you have union ministries, Nidhis, encroaching on the terrain of the cooperatives. You are going to have a serious problem. Now, this is a big political question for Kerala. Because the state of Kerala, we are drawing up a new vision about Kerala, the future. Kerala is very well known for its redistributive policies which have ensured basic minimum needs of every citizen here. A quality of life which is much beyond the average citizen in India. But our economy is not vibrant enough to produce quality jobs which educated unemployed in Kerala wants. Therefore, we have launched a major program of one, creating new SPVs like QFP to borrow from the market and construct infrastructure. But that we hope will attract one, investment from outside, two, lot of new entrepreneurs from Kerala coming for startup. Kerala has the best startup ecosystem in India. And they would require money. And where do we get the money from? We have said, well, our cooperative sector will be the agency. They will play a pivotal role in financing the growth of enterprise, particularly agro-processing enterprises in Kerala. Now, for this purpose, we amalgamated our state cooperative bank and district cooperative banks to create state cooperative Kerala Bank, which today is the second largest banking system in the state. Now, we want this to be protective umbrella for the past, which mirror account in the state cooperative bank, so that they are also brought into the core banking system. And tell the Malayalis, now you want to say help participate in the Kerala building of a new Kerala. All that you have to do is you invest, you deposit your money, your savings in the cooperative sector, in the Kerala bank. Be sure it will be utilized for building up new investments and say enterprises in Kerala. Now this is a political move to scuttle this. This is something I think the ruling classes in India did. A democratic Kerala, secular Kerala, provides all citizens with basic needs and also have a dynamic economic base which produces quality jobs so that we resolve our unemployment problem. That will be a model, a rival model to the neoliberal, an alternative to the neoliberal policies in India. So stakes are very high in supporting, in preserving the cooperative structure. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas Isaac, for exposing the political agenda behind formation of a separate ministry for cooperation. Now I request Dr. Ramakumar for the keynote address on today's topic. Dr. Ramakumar, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Comrade Nandakumar, Comrade Isaac, and other distinguished Comrade Debashish and other distinguished leaders of BEFI. It's a great pleasure to be speaking today at the BEFI platform when we are talking about the Bank Nationalization Day. It's as Comrade Isaac mentioned in great detail, this is a very difficult time for public banking in India. Neoliberal economic policies being implemented in this country for the last 30 years have had financial liberalization as their most important component element. And under financial liberalization, the weakening of public banking, the weakening of the very social purpose of public banking has been under a constant attack. We have seen this attack manifesting itself in multiple ways over the last 3 decades. We have seen the constant threat of privatization. We have seen the constant threat of reducing the presence of public banks in rural areas. We have seen an attack on the labor rights of bank employees. We have seen closing down of banks in unbanked and poorly banked areas. Thus, the very idea of nationalization, which was to convert private banking, which existed prior to nationalization, into a system of social and developmental banking after 1969, was sought to be completely weakened after 1991. The idea was to not just privatize, but also invite banks from across the world to come to India, allow foreign banks free entry into India, and also thus take over the financial capital of Indian citizens for their profiteering purposes. Efforts now have also been made to weaken banking as a system and promote financial markets, speculation in the financial markets and stock markets as an alternative lending option, alternative depositing option for the Indian citizens. The idea has been to reduce interest rates in the banking system to such an extent that there is no incentive for the depositor to come to the bank and invest, because across the world, you will see real interest rates have turned negative under free market policies, at least close to zero they have been. So there is basically people simply do not earn anything at all by depositing money into a bank. So it is a disincentive being constantly put forward, because you want to keep your interest rates as low as possible, which means that people will take their deposits out of the bank and invest in a stock market where speculation rules. This has been the broad trend that you see in the banking system across the world over the last 30 to 40 years. And the really crisis point in this kind of a phenomenon has been the 2007 or 2008 financial crisis that you saw across the world, where the buildup of toxic debts across the banking system and the financial system ultimately led to a banking collapse itself. All those are things which are very clear in front of us. So the very basic point that I want to begin from is the following. Neoliberalism is a class project. Neoliberalism is a class project because what it essentially tries to undertake is to shift assets, physical and financial, from one class in the society to another class in the society. And that is primarily by disempowering, dispossessing people of their assets on the one hand, and making those assets available to another class in the society. Banking system as well. The idea of killing social and developmental banking and allowing commercial interests to rule how banks operate and function is essentially also a class project in this perspective. It basically tries to shift financial assets from social hands into private hands, from government to private corporate companies, which will ultimately end up owning many of the banks that we have. So this is the broad point that we know about neoliberalism. But what we are talking about today is cooperatives. Now, cooperatives is something of a very slightly different animal when we look at the banking system as a whole. When financial liberalization began in 1991, it was essentially public banks which were included under its ambit. So when the Narasimhan Committee gave its report in 1991, there was very little about cooperative banks or cooperative societies. It was all about public banks and privatizing them and so on. But the idea, so for a while, cooperatives were essentially out of the ambit of neoliberalism. Some people thought that maybe neoliberalism will probably let it be. But that was not to be. When towards the end of the 90s, we had the Vaidyanathan Commission report coming in, which in some sense was the equivalent of the Narasimhan Committee report in 91 for the public banks. What did the Vaidyanathan Committee report say? It says all nice things about cooperative societies, how important they are cooperatives for the country, society, etc. But then it sort of tries to portray the cooperatives as a failed project in India, not quite considering the areas of success, like, for example, Kerala or partly even Maharashtra or other states. So basically, what the Narasimhan Committee tried to do for public banks, Vaidyanathan Committee sought to do for cooperative banks. And this, again, was premised on the idea that the social and developmental purpose of cooperatives, the people's character of cooperative banking, is not compatible with, is not in alignment with commercial purposes, is not in alignment with commercial modes of operation. And over a period of time, cooperatives in India should mimic or should be just like public sector banks or private sector banks in terms of how they undertake banking operations. But that was not why cooperatives were formed. Cooperatives were formed because they were thought of as banking instruments or banking institutions different from the usual banks that we have. These are people's groups which own it and run it. These are people's groups which take the profit and decide how to utilize it for the people's benefit. These have local people governing the institution, and hence they have a feel of the local economy, a feel of the local society. They know the people, they know their concerns, they know their needs. And thus, it was not like supposed to be a public bank whereby the bank manager will get transferred every 2 years or 3 years to another district or anything of that sort. That was not the purpose of cooperative banking. But what Vaidyanathan committee did was to try to create a cooperative banking system or envisage a cooperative banking system which would not be any different from an ordinary bank. And hence the CRIR that you apply for a banking system as per the Basel norms, for example, or for example, the prudential norms that you apply for banking system, all of that, it basically transferred from the commercial banking system into the cooperative banking system. And that was in some sense the inauguration of neoliberalism in the cooperative sector in this country. What did primarily Vaidyanathan committee try to do? They said that we are putting forward an agenda or a roadmap for reforms for cooperatives. They say that cooperatives are under loss across the country. X number are lost out of Y number of cooperative societies, and hence a special financial assistance is essential to rescue them from the state they are in, without understanding the fact that the health or absence of health of a cooperatives is essentially a political question. Cooperatives work well when there is a political system or a political regime that is conducive to the development and evolution of cooperatives in good health. But for Vaidyanathan, the whole development of the cooperative system was actually a technical exercise. He sought to remove it from social questions. He sought to remove it from questions of people-centered operations and tried to place it in the purely commercial domain. Just as you assess the functioning of a public bank, you should assess the functioning of a cooperative bank as well. And it is from that perspective that he said that this financial assistance that you must give to cooperatives to save them from loss will have conditionalities. Conditionalities, which means that the cooperative will reform itself first, and only if it commits itself to that reform will it be eligible to receive that special financial assistance from the government for its bailout. And it is in these conditionalities that the Vaidyanathan committee inserted provisions which killed the very spirit of cooperation in the system. And that is why I say it's an equivalent of the Narasimham committee in the cooperative sector. So it basically said that these conditionalities are in the form of legal and institutional reforms that the cooperatives should undertake, or the states should undertake in their cooperative societies under them. Only then they will be eligible for this kind of assistance from the government. What are these provisions? First, the CRIR, the capital to risk weighted asset ratio of cooperatives, should be raised to 7% by 2013, then to about 9% by 2016, and then permanently be kept at about 12%. But why should cooperative have the same capital to risk weighted asset ratio of a public bank? Why should it be the case? Because it is not running on that principle to begin with. But Vaidyanathan insisted that it should be 12%. The government has to transfer crores of money in states like Kerala. The government has to transfer crores of money into the cooperative banking system just to show that their CRIR is 12%. It's money that could be spent for other purposes. It is not having any real impact on the functioning or health of the cooperatives at all. But that was done, 12%. Then it said that all government shares in cooperatives should ultimately be retired. Government should have no role in the running of cooperatives. It looks like a very, very normal principle to apply, that government should stay away. But the idea of government staying away was not to give real autonomy to the cooperative, but to ensure that it works on commercial private principles. That very the very objective of inserting this kind of a clause was not to provide them autonomy of any sort, but to actually ensure that they work on purely commercial principles. Then it said that no cooperatives should transact any business with non-members. Why not? Cooperatives have in this country undertaken business with non-members for so many decades. Why should you insist that only you should take deposits only from your members? You should give credit only to your members. That's not how a financial system functions. The very health of many cooperatives which are running well is by transacting with non-members, because probably that's where the profits are. And you sort of push that profit back into, sort of recoup that profits into your system so that your members benefit. What's wrong in that? But Vaidyanathan committee said no. Only members should be able to keep deposits and only members should be given loans. How can such a system exist? It's such a closed system, such a rigid closed system. You can never be functioning efficiently in any form. But that was the insistence there. Then he said that there should be no use of the name of the bank in the cooperative society. Now that's what Comrade Isaac referred to in his talk, which has become a big point of controversy in the state of Kerala, for example. The name of the bank should be only for those institutions which are under the Banking Regulation Act. Because you are under the Cooperative Societies Act of the state, you cannot keep that name. But that's a very technical point. The idea is simply to take the name of the bank away from a cooperative society's name, which will basically disincentivize people from putting deposits into the banking system. Also, because only members can put deposits into the banking system. Thereby, it is an effort to drive depositors away from the cooperative banking system towards other banks, including commercial banks or private banks or foreign banks. That is the very purpose of this this initiative of the Vaidyanathan committee. So I'm not going to list all the points that the Vaidyanathan committee made, but the point is that here was a report which was accepted by the government at that time, which basically essentially sought to convert the foundational character of cooperatives in this country from a people-centered institution, from a social institution, from a developmental institution to a corporatized institution, to an institution which works purely on commercial purposes. That is something that the Vaidyanathan committee inaugurated. Now, that was taken forward by other committees that followed. There was a Prakash Bakshi Commission, which came, I think, in 2012. And Prakash Bakshi Commission essentially said all tax, primary agricultural cooperative societies, which come under the district cooperative banks, essentially, the third tier, they cannot exist. There is no room for their existence as independent banking institutions. All PACs should become banking correspondents of the district cooperative banks or the state cooperative banks. That was Prakash Bakshi's recommendation. What is the rationale? There's no rationale. Why can't, look at a state like Kerala. In a state like Kerala, the average deposit base of a PACs is 20 crore. The average deposit base, there are PACs which are much higher than this, but the average is 20 crore. 20 crore is a huge amount of money. And they can survive on their own. They can make huge investments in that local economy. They can intervene in that local economy in production, input supply, marketing, whatever they want to do. But they cannot survive in that form. They should actually become banking correspondents of state cooperative banks or district cooperative banks. This was Prakash Bakshi's recommendation. Then came other measures from the union government. For example, the Banking Laws Amendment Act of 2012. The Banking Laws Amendment Act of 2012 essentially said that the SLR, the statutory liquidity ratio, and the CRR should actually be the same for scheduled commercial banks and cooperative banks. Why? Because you want to convert the operation of cooperative banks into a purely commercial basis, nothing else. There's no other reason why the SLR and CRR of cooperative banks should be the same as the SLR and CRR of public sector banks or even commercial banks, private or public. So you see one after the other, a set of commissions come into being. They put forward recommendations which are all pushing the cooperative banking sector into a particular direction, and all of which are essentially accepted by the government as recommendations. Then came the Malegam Committee. The Malegam Committee was in late 2010s or early 2010s. Then came the Gandhi Committee, R. Gandhi Committee, which submitted its report in 2016. All these reports essentially repeated what Vaidyanathan, Prakash Bakshi, or other reports, other commissions had essentially said about cooperatives. Now, this was the situation. I'll come back to Gandhi Committee in a minute. But this situation was what existed by the early 2010s, 2012, 13, 14, etc. But by that time, there was also another form of thinking within the neoliberal establishment in India, where they sought to rethink the very structure of cooperative societies in a very different way. That was a parallel kind of thinking going on. This was a time when Raghuram Rajan was the RBI governor and so on. He essentially floated the idea of small finance banks and payment banks, etc., as new institutions in the domain. Now, what is the need for a small finance bank or a payments bank when you have pervasive presence of public sector banks in this country? You're essentially trying to take some business, hive off some business from public sector banks and give it to these banks. What is the purpose? Can't public sector banks do the same job? No, the idea was to keep public sector banks and their commercial mode of operation separate, and to give specific activities which public sector banks currently do, for example, payment services, provision of subsidies, or giving NREGS wages, etc. You create a new institution for that. That's why payments banks were created. And then it was also argued that for some specific purposes, you need small banks, and for which we create small finance banks, ISAF and all banks which are now are that kind of banks. But the point about cooperatives here is, it was argued that all urban cooperative societies should ultimately become transformed into small finance banks. There should be no urban cooperative banks anymore. All urban cooperative banks should become SFBs. This was the idea that was mooted from the RBI and the neoliberal establishment. Now, what is the key point about this particular recommendation that we are talking about? If you see small finance banks essentially undertake a basic set of operations. It does not undertake every banking activity. It undertakes, for example, basic deposit facility. It lends to unbanked groups like farmers, small industries, etc. It sells insurance products, pension products, etc. It lends to small and marginal farmers, small and micro enterprises, etc. So they only undertake this much. They don't undertake any complicated banking operation, but they operate nationally. So they do a set of niche services, but provide it nationally. That is the nature of small finance banks. But take urban cooperative banks. Urban cooperative banks are the opposite of it. They provide universal banking to a small area, not small set of operations nationally, but the other way around. That is a large set of operations to a small clientele. An urban cooperative bank may be a part of a city, covering a part of a large city. So if you want to convert, and they undertake all kinds of activities. If you look at it, they undertake all the jobs of a small finance bank, and they also undertake a large set of additional activities alongside. They sell different kind of open specialized branches, including for industrial purposes, etc. They sell prepaid payment instruments. They also are a banking correspondent. They can be a PAN agent. They can open a currency chest. They can have access to NEFT, RTGS, etc. All these are possible. So the idea here was to convert all urban cooperative banks in this country into small finance banks. How can that be possible? There's a basic question involved in converting one institution and changing its very foundational character and changing it to another institution, just because you have an idea on the table. So if you look at it closely, you will see that this is simply an unworkable idea. This has remained on the table for a long period of time, but no person has sought to touch it or take it to the next stage. So different committees have sat on it and said, yes, this should be done by this date, that date, etc. But nothing has been done on it. That's primarily because it's almost impossible to convert them. Like, primarily why? You take a small finance bank. You take the small finance bank and look at what they have to do. Look at their targets given by the RBI. They have to have 25% of their branches in rural areas. An SFB. An SFB also should have 75% loan given to the priority sector, not 40%, 75%. An SFB should also give 18% to agriculture. Right? This is the way in which SFBs have been notified. But then look at urban cooperative banks. Almost more than half of their operations is actually in urban areas by the very name. How can you convert an urban cooperative bank into a SFB whose nature of operations looks to be essentially largely rural in nature or semi-urban in nature? That contradiction remained in a big way. So this idea, nobody took forward after a point. People understood that this is not an idea that is likely to work. But it was in currency for about 4 to 5 years in the regulatory system. This idea was ongoing. Governors like Raghuram Rajan were very eager to convert urban cooperative banks into SFBs, etc., but nothing happened. Now, rural cooperatives is a very different story. Rural cooperatives are a very different story because urban cooperatives are under RBI. Because from 2014, they have been brought under the regulatory ambit of the RBI, which is okay. But rural cooperative banks are not like that. They are societies. They are primarily under the state cooperative laws, and center cannot touch it. Under entry 32 in the state list of the constitution, cooperation is essentially a state matter, unless you are a multi-state cooperative society. So this meant that Government of India or RBI could not do much about rural cooperative societies, but they can create problems. What is that? You cannot keep bank in your name. You cannot give loans. And if you want to have the right to accept deposits and give credit under the Banking Regulation Act, then you cannot keep bank in your name. Now, this is very contradictory to the very functioning of cooperatives because they are federal in nature. The constitution allows cooperatives to be under the state list exclusively under entry 32 of list 2. But then you are saying from the top, you are giving instructions that you cannot keep bank in your name. It's not your business. It's not the business of the RBI. It's not the business of the central government. It's the business of the state government. Now, this has been a very important question related to how federal principles operate in our country for quite a while. And this has now become a very major issue between states like Kerala on the one hand and central government on the other. But rural cooperative societies are facing a very different kind of crisis for over a period of time. Let's accept that. Not all rural cooperatives function well. That's primarily because of many reasons. Scheduled commercial banks have entered into rural areas in a big way, which is a fact. Over the last many years, many rural branches have been opened, and they basically cut into the business of cooperative societies which function in the very same rural areas. And that's a challenge. Competition is increasing, and rural cooperative banks are unable to, in many ways, meet the financial prowess which scheduled commercial banks have. That's one important problem. The second is that RRBs are also improving their functioning. RRBs are also expanding their operations. Our RRBs are getting technically savvier than before. They're offering new services which earlier they did not use to provide, and that's also a new area of competition with regard to rural cooperative societies. Small finance banks are coming, and small finance banks are, because they have to operate 25% of their branches in rural areas. They also come into direct competition with rural cooperative societies. That's yet another challenge for cooperative societies. Payment banks are coming, because earlier NREGS wages could be given through the local cooperative society. Now it is being given through payment banks, and that's a business lost, because for every wage payment that you provide under NREGS, 3% commission goes to the institution which is facilitating the transfer, which is a loss for the cooperative. Payment banks are taking it away. Are all payment banks running in profit? No, that's a different question altogether. Right? And finally, India Post. Now, that's an interesting measure. All post offices being converted into post office banks. That is also, however, in direct competition with rural cooperative societies. So a lot of things are happening in the financial system, which are essentially pushing cooperative societies in rural areas into a state of heightened competition. And they are not all are able to meet that this sort of onslaught of competition that you are having. Excuse me, sorry. Plus, there is constant pressure. You cannot keep bank in your name. You have to convert all packs into banking correspondence of state cooperative banks and district cooperative banks. All these pressures are constantly coming. The income tax department says you have to pay tax on your profit. When demonetization comes, you are consciously penalized in terms of being able to change the currency notes that came in. Also, you see a hostile policy atmosphere to the cooperative system. The policy atmosphere is thoroughly hostile to the working of cooperatives. And that's the very nature of neoliberal policies that we have seen. As I said, the very idea of neoliberalism, which is a class project, is to shift assets from one class to another class in the society, from the poorer class to the richer class, from the public to the private, from the small to the big corporate. That's the overall trend that you see in the phase of capitalism that we live in. But in the case of cooperatives, you see it in a very, very interesting parallel way also. That is, the assets of cooperatives, which are essentially financial assets, are slowly being sought to be transferred or pushed out of that system into the larger commercial banking system, which includes public and private, but essentially it's going out of people's hands anyway. So this is the very sort of a problem that we see across the country, which neoliberalism has led to. Now, this has come to a new stage with what Comrade Isaac mentioned a little while back, with the coming in of the Narendra Modi government in 2014. Now, all the reform activities that I mentioned till now were essentially piloted by either RBI or by the Ministry of Finance in the central government. They were done by bureaucrats who are wedded to the neoliberal ideology. Their training classes are done by World Bank and IMF, so they think in one way, and you have a neoliberal package on the table. We know it. We know that the ideology which drives this neoliberal package comes from there. We know that. But with the coming of the Narendra Modi government, even this has disappeared. Even this modicum of some kind of objectivity in assessing the financial system has disappeared. It's become completely politicized. So new packages are not sort of created within the institutions like RBI or the Ministry of Finance. It comes from Nagpur. It comes from the two gentlemen who are at the helm of affairs in India, both of whom incidentally have a beard. right? The two bearded people in Delhi, as they say now, they hatch a set of policy, and that becomes the package for the country. And that's true for cooperatives also. What is that in cooperatives? Amit Shah manages elections for BJP. He knows how to win. He knows how to throw cash. He knows how to, he has figured out a way to buy MLAs or MPs if required, push hundreds of crores into a single constituency to generate a result in his favor and so on. He has figured out that very well. But in a few states, he is not able to penetrate beyond a point. He has figured that out. And that is, one is Kerala, the other is Maharashtra. In these kinds of states, partly Tamil Nadu, partly West Bengal, he has not quite been able to figure out how this electorate is operating, because he has had no success in any of these states. The only one seat that he had in Kerala, that also he lost. In West Bengal, he threw so much money in and he thought he was going to win, he lost. In Tamil Nadu also, he has very little presence. So in these states, Maharashtra, in urban areas of Maharashtra, BJP has some strength. But in rural areas of Maharashtra, BJP is almost not there. It's still the Congress and NCP, which have some kind of presence in rural Maharashtra, to an extent now Shiv Sena also. He has seen that one thing that is common to all these, and one thing that provides opposition politicians, opposition to BJP politicians, considerable financial clout in these regions and states, is cooperatives. And that has to be destroyed, or it has to be captured. It has to be either destroyed or it has to be captured. And this has become the political line of the BJP, and it has also become the financial or economic policy of the government of India. So when neoliberalism was ruling, it has an ideology. It has a logic to it, which you can argue with. And you can prove, you can try to say that it's wrong. It won't work. It will not work because of these reasons. But here, none of that is actually in operation. This is a lawless game. There are no laws. There are no norms in this game. Just go, destroy, capture. That's the name of the game with the BJP coming into power. And that is what you see in the cooperative sector also. Having seen that the CPIM in Kerala has extraordinary financial clout in the rural areas thanks to rural cooperatives, and NCP and Congress have in Maharashtra, or others parties have in West Bengal or Tamil Nadu, they have decided that we need to just destroy this. That's only way that's one important way in which we have to find an entry into these states politically. And thus, despite the fact that cooperatives fall under entry 32 of the state list, that is an exclusive domain of state governments, they have formed a ministry of cooperation. In no other case does the ministry exist where it is such an exclusive domain of state governments. The only domain in which central government functioned with respect to cooperatives was when cooperatives exist in more than one state, that is multi-state cooperative society. There, central government has a role, which is accepted by the constitution also. In no other cooperative society or bank has the central government any role. But they want to overturn that. Now, if you look at it very closely, over the last few years, what they have done is that in state after state, if you see very closely, they have seen the capture of cooperatives as a very important political project of the BJP. I'll give you 3-4 examples. I'm not going to go into detail on that. Take a state like Maharashtra. Maharashtra has sugar cooperatives. Sugar cooperatives are the very financial muscle of rural politicians in Maharashtra, largely wedded to NCP of Sharad Pawar and Congress party. Now he wants to destroy that. Now, how do you destroy that? In each region, there are sugar barons, people who have formed a cooperative society, have nurtured it. Sometimes it's their father or grandfather, and the grandson or somebody is now controlling that sugar mill, and they control the whole rural economy of the day. There's a certain pattern to the rural economic structure in states like Maharashtra, which is largely in the western regions. It's about very extremely cash-rich sugar cooperatives. Now, what is the first thing that Amit Shah did when he started looking at Maharashtra in greater focus? He first decided that the first step would be to buy off all these guys. So CBI, Enforcement Directorate, whatnot, Income Tax Department, everybody is pushed into action, and each leader of the cooperative society is taken hold of, and some case is created against them, and constant harassment. And they were able to pull in to the BJP. BJP is a washing machine. All stains that you have prior to joining BJP, you pass through a washing machine, you become an ultra clean person when you enter the BJP. Right? That's true for all kinds of politicians. The extraordinarily corrupt politician becomes the cleanest politician when he enters the BJP. So Radhakrishna Vikhe Patil. Radhakrishna Vikhe Patil is from Ahmednagar in Maharashtra, is no small fish. He controls the sugar industry in the whole of one particular region. Right? They bought away Radhakrishna Vikhe Patil from Ahmednagar. Then they bought Vijay Singh Moite Patil from Sholapur. Then they bought in Dhananjay Mahadik from Kolhapur. Then they bought in Harshavardhan Patil from Indapur. These are not small fish. These were leaders of the Congress or the NCP. One of them was even a minister. Another was an opposition leader. Radhakrishna Vikhe Patil was an opposition leader. He was bought in and brought into them. So first, what they did was they brought all these barons into their fold. No, that is not enough. More capturing is to be done. Now, with the Ministry of Cooperation, they are taking that next step. I'll come to the Ministry of Cooperation in a little while and what exactly they are trying to do. But if you just look at this. Devendra Fadnavis was Chief Minister between 2016 and 2021. You will actually see that in Devendra Fadnavis ministry, only 4 ministers were there who had any link to cooperatives. But look at the government which is pushed out now, Mahavikas Agadi of Uddhav Thackeray. There were 16 ministers in that cabinet who had come from the cooperative system. So you can see what's the difference and what the BJP is aiming for. They want to capture the cooperative banking system, thus kill the financial muscle of opposition in Maharashtra. And thus, of course, now the plan is on to swallow Shiv Sena and become the only Hindutva party in that state. Now the next is to capture others also. That is in Maharashtra. Look at a state like Kerala. Kerala is well known to all of us in terms of the strength of cooperatives. 62% of Kerala's population is registered as a member in PACS, while the corresponding number in India is 10%. Right? 70% of all deposits of cooperatives in India are from Kerala. 60% of all deposits in Kerala are in cooperatives. In India, it's about 20%. And for every 100 credit accounts in banks, the number of borrowers in PACS is 35 in Kerala, while it is 184. For every 100 credit accounts in banks, the number of borrowers is 35 in India, but 184 in Kerala. That's because you give to non-members. Now, it is this system what they want to capture. They've seen that one of the important ways in which CPM could be weakened in Kerala, just like NCP in Maharashtra, is by destroying its presence in the cooperative credit system. But constitution is there. You can only involve multi-state cooperatives in your work, and you don't have political strength at the cadre level to create cooperative societies on your own. So what Amit Shah is trying to do now is to use the multi-state cooperative society tag to encourage BJP cadre in Kerala to form or register multi-state cooperative banks in Kerala, which in the BJP parlance is called Hindu banks. Right? So they are not under the State Cooperative Act. They come under the central government's multi-state cooperative society ambit. And the campaign that is going around is cooperatives are a den of black money in Kerala. Hindu money should be put in Hindu banks. That's the slogan. I'm sure. I don't live here. You live here. So you know it better than me. Hindu money should be put in Hindu banks. That's the new slogan. It is a project to kill the PAC system in Kerala, to push deposits out of that system, to threaten people, to push their deposits out of that system into these new banks, which will then come under the direct control of the BJP. So this is what they are trying to do in Kerala. Look at Gujarat, the bastion of Hindu nationalism. But one interesting feature about Gujarat is Congress is not a weak party in Gujarat. Congress is there. And Congress is very strong among cooperatives in Gujarat. Most of the cooperatives in Gujarat are under the Congress party or under controlled by their leader. Not most, now it's come down a bit, but substantial component is still with them. Now, look at the example of Amul. Amul was ruled by Congress. And Amul is one of the societies out of the 17 or 18 which forms the GCMMF, Gujarat Cooperative Milk Marketing Federation. But they wanted to capture Amul. And Amul was captured by a very complicated procedure whereby they first put 3 BJP men into the board completely illegally and then tried to capture that board. The board went to court. Of course, you know how courts function in India. Courts decided in a particular way. They allowed that to happen. And then they now have captured Amul. And now they're trying to move into other dairy, livestock cooperatives in the state and capture all of them also. That is what is happening in Gujarat. Look at, there also you see Ghanshyam Amin, Narhari Amin, all these leaders of Congress, erstwhile leaders of Congress, were actually leaders of cooperative movement in Gujarat. All of them are now in BJP. Narhari Amin is actually an MP of the Rajya Sabha. Now, this is about Gujarat. Last is Uttar Pradesh. Uttar Pradesh is a state where cooperatives are under the control of the Samajwadi Party. Mulayam Singh Yadav, when he first became a minister in 1977, his portfolio was cooperation. And whenever he came to power as chief minister later, his brother Shivpal Yadav was the minister of cooperatives. So Samajwadi Party had some kind of presence in the cooperative sector in that state. Now, BJP's idea is kill that also. That is now under action. Now, for example, in few years back, in the elections to the very prestigious Uttar Pradesh Cooperative Land Development Bank election, BJP defeated Samajwadi Party and captured power after Yogi Adityanath came to power. And that is now continuing into other cooperatives. So their agenda in UP now is to capture 7,500 cooperatives in the next 2 or 3 years. It is in this context that we have to see the overall formation of the Ministry of Cooperation. What the BJP does under its rule in India is to kill the very federal character of our constitution, centralize powers as much as you can in the hands of the central government, and weaken the power of the states. They want to see India as a single unified force, a country which speaks Hindi as the only language, the country which has only one religion, Hinduism, which in their view is Hindutva, right? So they want to create a homogeneous nation of one sort where power is centralized at the top in the hands of a few people. Now that, in this particular case, the whole attack on the very federal structure of the constitution that you see with the formation of the Ministry of Cooperation with Amit Shah as the minister, you see exactly the very same situation emerging. What does the what was corporation doing earlier? Corporation was under the Ministry of Agriculture prior to this formation of this ministry. And that ministry, that department, which existed under the Ministry of Agriculture, had only one job, which is NCDC, National Cooperative Development Corporation, which gives loans to different groups. NCDC was the only job of the that particular unit, which looked after cooperation. Now, you have to basically hive it off and create a ministry. Then you need some activity there. No? You cannot create. Now, what they're saying is they want 200 and 300 staff in that particular ministry. Now, an order is going to be passed, which will give them 300 new staff in that particular ministry. What are they going to do? So, one of the 4 schemes that they are now going to do is first digitization of PACs. Now, why do you want to do digitization of PACs? Who are you? It's the state government's job to digitize PACs. In Kerala now, there is an ongoing scheme to digitize PACs. Many PACs have already been digitized. More are in the pipeline. Why should the Ministry of Corporation spend 3,000 crore to create a software for all PACs in India and install it? In my speculative opinion, there is only one objective behind this. Is A, to make one step ahead in capturing them, of course, but 2, it is to get their databases into the central system. So basically, you need the data. Only then you can threaten people. Only then you can go and file cases against whoever is depositing in these cooperatives. All these political purposes are behind this spending of 3,000 crore to create a unified software for PACs under the Ministry of Corporation, where you have no business to do it under the Constitution. Now that is a new scheme of the Ministry of Corporation. The second is education and training. That's okay. And the third is credit guarantee fund for cooperatives. That's also okay. But the fourth is what is called Sahakar Se Samruddhi Yojana. Sahakari Se Samruddhi Yojana. Now, what is that supposed to do? It is supposed to take care of NCDC, and it is also going to take care of multi-state cooperative societies. So there is a scheme now out there which has an allocation of about 300 to 400 crore, which is now exclusively going to look at NCDC and multi-state cooperative societies. And all the funding assistance that these multi-state cooperative societies are going to push in are going to be for the new institutions registered under the Act, which are like our Hindu banks in Kerala. In other words, this is a scheme to siphon away funds from the center and channel it for the growth of the BJP as a political party in different states of India. This is yet another plan that the BJP. So basically, there are only 4 schemes, and 2 and 3 are harmless. You can leave that. But 1 and 4, which is digitization of PACs and Sahakari Se Samruddhi Yojana, are extraordinarily dangerous schemes, which essentially directly violate the federal character of the Constitution and have a purely political objective of capturing cooperatives in these states. That's the time that we are living in. These multi-state cooperative societies are going to be, particularly if the Supreme Court ruling coming in with Comrade Isaac mentioned, it's going to be very difficult to get into another area. The Supreme Court has very clearly said you cannot form any law other than for multi-state cooperative societies in any state. That's the state government's job. Now, they may change the constitution. That's a different point. But if they don't do that, multi-state cooperatives will be the core agenda that they will adopt to kill and capture cooperatives in other states. And the Hindu Bank in Kerala is an example of that you see. There's another thing that they're trying, which is farmer producer company. No, that's a completely, now for a while, farmer producer company, which are not registered in the Cooperative Societies Act of States, but under the Companies Act, is actually being pushed forward as an alternative. But in many places, that is not pushed forward as an alternative to cooperatives itself. Now, in my personal view, farmer producer companies have some advantages. We need to see where they can be implemented, and in places where they can be implemented, they should be implemented. And state governments also should form farmer producer companies where required. But to look at it as an alternative to cooperatives is basically a wrong idea. Farmer producer companies cannot be a substitute for cooperatives. They can complement, they can supplement the presence of cooperatives, but they cannot be a substitute for cooperatives. That would essentially be killing the whole people-centered nature of functioning of cooperative societies. But that's the danger that we are. Why are these being done? Because FPOs can be given direct funding by the central government, and the BJP sees that as yet another way to get into the realm of collective action. After all of this is collective action, cooperative or FPC or Kudumbashri, everything is collective action, right? So you want to get into the realm of collective action, and then you want to capture that area. That's essentially the ploy of the bill. There is no ideology in this. There is no economic ideology in this. I'm supposed to speak as an economist, but I cannot speak from an economist perspective on what Amit Shah does. Because that's not his point. That's not, he doesn't think that way. Then how can I criticize it from an economic point of view? He thinks purely in a political way. And hence my response to that is also political. It is an effort to capture the institutions under the state domain. Look at in states like Kerala, look at the new areas where BJP is trying to build their muscle. And actually, there's a case study to be done there. You look at weaving societies in Ramakumar, right? Look at the extent to which BJP is trying to creep into that area, form farmer producer companies of weavers, get them funding directly from the Narendra Modi government, and thus politicize their activities and capture their clientele and membership. These institutions have now become political instruments, tools in the hands of political groups to capture political power. The earlier idea of they being important driving forces in rural economy, rural economic growth and development is just out of the road. It's just not out there. Even the neoliberal package of privatizing all this and giving to private people, that is also not there. This has become completely an anarchic field whereby the politics of the central government, the agenda of growth of a political party has taken precedence over every other ideological argument or theoretical argument, as I might say. This is the time that we are living in, comrades, and that is why I think if you look at cooperatives as a domain, you will very clearly see the imprint, what the central government is doing. You will see the imprint of that political ideology, that majoritarian ideology, that idea to centralize everything, to homogenize India. All of that will find reflections in the way central government is formulating policies in the cooperative sector also. And that's what we are now fighting against. So when we look at when organizations like BEFI look at the whole question of cooperative banking and their location, their slot in this whole neoliberal package, this politics should not be lost sight of. There is a constant flux of ideas. There's a constant change of what RBI thought in 2000s is not what they thought in the next decade. And now even that is gone, as I just mentioned. Now it is purely political. We have to take this message to the people, which basically tells them that this is an agenda of a fascistic ideology trying to take over our society and our polity. And the fight has to be broadened. The fight cannot be anymore a trade union initiative, though it's also an important initiative in itself. It has to go beyond the confines of trade union movement. It has to go into the people. The resistance to BJP has to become a people's movement. I'm dreaming of the day when people in India will get to do something like what Sri Lankan people did, right? And we are basically, the anger of the people cannot be, the frustration of the people cannot be capped for a very long time. You are living in a situation whereby unemployment is at historic high levels. Poverty levels are rising. Economy is not growing. Exports are not growing. investment is not growing, savings are not growing. You are slipping in the hunger index. Where is this country going? And how long can you camouflage your failures with the Hindutva ideology? How long can you tell people, yes, you suffered during Notbandi, you suffered during GST, you suffered during COVID, your mother died, your father died, but remember you are a Hindu, so vote for me. How long can it go on? There is a limit to which people can be fooled. Right? And I'm sure that day will come when people will rise up to the challenge and throw this political ideology out of power. And I think organizations like DEFI have a very important role to play in that shift of democracy that we should ultimately see in this country. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you, Dr. Ramakumar, for your wonderful and fantastic presentation today. We are really enlightened and enriched with your presentation. In fact, there was a little confusion even amongst our members why we are selected a topic like this on the eve of bank nationalization. Now that confusion is over. It has become very clear from your presentation that this is a class project. The understanding of the movement has to reach that position. This is a class project. Attack is now on the last resort of the rural people. When we are entering the 54th year of bank nationalization, the entire objectives of that bank nationalization has been almost totally defeated. The so-called academicians in the NCAER, Poonam Gupta and our Panagaria has given a fantastic report, whether it is having any economics, whether it is having any politics, we are unable to understand. They say that it is time to privatize all the public sector banks. If the government desires so, they can at least keep State Bank of India for their political purpose. This is the nutshell of the recommendation of an institution. Ramakumar sir, we do not consider you as a mere academician or a mere economist. We very well understand that you are having a class perspective and that you have proved here. If I borrow the language of Dr. Prabhat Patnaik, you have exposed in detail how the neo-fascist, neoliberal alliance is working 24/7 in this country. The only agenda of them is to have a totalitarian regime. That is what is happening in this country. So we are very, very thankful to you for giving such a inspiring and thought-provoking speech. And we really feel it our responsibility to take this message to the people. We are having an umbrella platform of United Forum of Bank Unions. There are so many discrepancies, so many shortcomings in those alliance because many of our constituents are still considering it as a give and take policy from the government and the trade union movement. They are not in a position to take this project as a class project. Your presentation has really given us a more insight into the affairs. Sir, there are a few questions in the Facebook and chat box. If you can spend some more time with us, I request our Prashant and Krishnamurthy to raise those questions which have come in the chat box. Prashant. Not audible, Prashant.
Hello.
Yes, now.
Okay. Has a strong cooperative movement in Kerala able to prevent the menace of microfinance institutions that fleece the rural populace lending with usurious rate of interest in the country, especially in the eastern parts of the country? Do you feel there's a continuation to that? Do you feel the capture of the savings and possessions of the people of the country, dispossessing and impoverishing the people, will backfire into a revolt like Shipoi Mutiny when the economic crisis gets blown up?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So basically, the first question is, let me try to trace how microcredit or microfinance comes to India. It comes from Bangladesh, where the Grameen Bank experience is essentially an NGO-led experience, which is private in nature, where interest rates were 24 to 36% per year, that is 2 to 3% per month, and hence was extremely usurious in nature. But when this idea was transplanted into India in the early 90s, India actually took a very interesting different path. It said that we will do it through our public banks. It's an interesting idea, but we will do it through our public banks. And that's how NABARD's SHG bank linkage program basically comes up. And we basically begin to ensure that interest rates are not as high as it was in Bangladesh and so on. Come the late 1990s, you shift your policy. You think that you should allow private players also to take over this area, and organizations like SKS of Vikramakula in Andhra Pradesh, for example, were promoted actively by policy, and thus this microcredit regime of India became not distinguishable from the Bangladesh experience. Interest rates began to be very high. A lot of borrowers of microcredit in, for example, the Krishna district of Andhra Pradesh and so on, committed suicide because of harassment, and law had to be changed in those areas. Now, in this whole process that you see, now microcredit has moved from Andhra and other parts of South India to Eastern India, which is what the comrade's question was essentially about. And there you see exactly the replica of what is a problem with microcredit. Interest rates are very high, harassment of borrowers happens all the time, and it basically acts as a kind of drain on people's capital rather than an incremental effect, have an incremental effect on people's capital. But Kerala, if you see, has taken a very different path in this, and cooperatives are actually part of this plan. Now, cooperatives have not done anything very specific in this, but Kerala, under the left, has taken a very different position. That is how the Kudumbashree experience comes into being. Kudumbashree continues with the spirit of the SHG bank linkage program, but it actually enters into credit in a very different way, in a very expanded, progressive way. It forms self-help groups or neighborhood groups of women. It allows them credit access, but this credit that is provided to them is through public banks to begin with, and the state government actually provides a subvention on this interest rate. As a result, it is possible that most Kudumbashree loans and other loans that you get can actually be of very low interest rate. I have not looked at the very most recent number, but at one point it was even about 4 to 5%. Right? It essentially involves a subsidy payment from the government, which essentially acts as a subvention on the interest rates that banks provide loans at to self-help groups, which means that the cost of credit comes down and interest rates also will come down. As a component part of this larger progressive policy of the left, you see that Kudumbashree is not the microcredit institution that you will see in other parts of India. And here, cooperative banks also are able to give loans to Kudumbashree groups for which they are eligible for the same subvention that other banks are getting. This is how the microcredit situation in Kerala is very different from the situation in other states, and cooperatives, as I said, play a part in this whole story.
There's one more question, sir. In Kerala, the two-tier system, merger of DCCB and State Cooperative Bank is completed. Whether it is beneficial, do you recommend the same for other states?
I won't say replicate in other states, because each state has a very different banking system, including in cooperatives, and it has to be appropriate to the context. But what we see in Kerala is you now have a banking institution which is the second largest in the state in terms of its financial power. Now, this provides us an opportunity. Now, the Kerala Bank was formed only a couple of years back. Now, it's only begun its activities, but it has got enormous potential in front of it. The enormous potential is that now, because these two are functioning as proper banks, district and state banks, they can offer a variety of financial products to people, which earlier was not possible. Number one. Number two is that this capital that, because most banks keep their deposits in the district and state cooperative bank, which provides them with enormous liquidity to begin with. This liquidity is now possible to be used as capital for Kerala's overall development. Now, that is now possible for Kerala Bank. And that's what the Kerala Bank is now doing. They are designing new financial products which can be offered to the people of Kerala. They are trying to mobilize capital which can be used for different investment purposes in the state, which earlier was not possible. Earlier, you were completely dependent on the banking system, which was the targets and guidelines were provided from the RBI. Now, you can actually have a people-centered institution creating policies, products, and programs for people and the state's economic development. That's a key difference that I see. I see it as a potential, and I'm sure that if you ask me this question after 4 to 5 years, we'll have a clearer answer to this question.
There's one more question. That is post-amendment of BR Act, what will be the future for ARDBs, agriculture card?
Now that's not clear. Now that is an area which is not covered by the change in regulations. As of now, they have been left as they are, but I do not see that continuing for a longer time. There will be some regulation that will come in which will cover them also. I'm not going to speculate on what that would be from the central government, but as of now, they are outside the regulations. You are right, but I don't see that continuing for long.
Okay. This question is from Comrade Rajiv, West Bengal. What will be your suggestion and our role for the survival of card banks in the long term? This ARDBs in the long term.
Now, let me put it this way. The one thing that we need to, we on the left, have to be very conscious about when we think about these attacks on the cooperative credit system or cooperative system is that we also should understand and appreciate the fact that the old ways of functioning cannot be continued. Even cooperatives in states like Kerala cannot, or West Bengal or wherever they cannot be allowed to be of the same type or the same or functioning the same way as in the past. We have to understand that the challenges, numerous challenges are coming up, not just from the central government, but also from competition from other banks and other things that I mentioned earlier. We have to ensure that the efficiency of functioning of these cooperative societies and banks are improved and they are financially competent and strong, where we have political power. Unless we do that, it will be much easier for the central government or other intervening groups to weaken these institutions and ultimately take them over or privatize them. So our job is also not just in resisting these changes, in my view, but wherever we are politically powerful, it should also be our objective to ensure that the efficiency of functioning of these institutions are improved and they are placed on a sound financial foundation. That work should, so even in the case of cards that you mentioned, our effort should be to try to make them stand on their own feet, stand on a sound financial foundation. And of course, we should continue resisting the new changes that are coming up, but that should not absolve us from our primary responsibility in running these institutions more efficiently.
One more question, sir. Can we ignore the corporate agenda of looting the huge resources lying in the cooperative sector? Is it not right that the cooperative sector to be limited to members only? Can we ignore the corporate agenda of looting the huge resources lying in the cooperative sector? Don't you feel that therefore the cooperative sector to be limited to the members only?
No. Now, the problem is an institution like that, if you simply limit to the members, you are also limiting the scope of its activity. Now, it is quite possible that in some activities, cross-subsidization will be required. So you enter into an activity outside your realm, you engage with outside your membership, you make a profit there and you plow it back to your membership. There's nothing wrong in a society doing that. But what these new regulations do is to limit the activity base of cooperatives in such a way that they will never, many of them will simply perish if you if you limit their activity only to members. Think about a cooperative society of extremely poor people, of a set of people, of farmers or small and marginal farmers who basically make very little surplus. That society cannot be a powerful society. That society can bring some relief to them, but it cannot, for example, like strong societies do, create larger infrastructure for them, create markets, or generate activities which provide them long-term livelihoods and so on. They will be unable to do that because that kind of surplus will simply not exist. For that kind of surplus to exist, you need to engage with non-members. And there is nothing wrong in a society doing that, diversifying their activities out of their membership.
So there is some support coming up for Vaidyanathan committee also, some observations like election is not conducted regularly and all are there. And
I completely agree. I am not in any way saying that cooperatives all was hunky-dory with cooperative societies prior to Vaidyanathan. My problem with the Vaidyanathan report is not in insisting that there should be elections. My problem with the Vaidyanathan report is in going beyond that. If you had said that if you require financial assistance from the central government, you should have elections every 5 years, I would have supported it. That's not what he said. He said other things which essentially kill the people's character of cooperative societies, including by raising CRAR, applying prudential norms to them, changing the name bank from their name. All of that was completely unnecessary. If you wanted to ensure democratization, you could have simply insisted that they should have elections every 5 years. If you don't have elections every 5 years, you will not have financial assistance. Everybody would have supported it.
Yes, and one more thing, sir, development of increase in number of Nidhi companies across Nidhi companies, section 620, Nidhi companies. This is a question from my side only. How do you feel it? How do you judge their threat to the cooperative sector?
I know I have not quite studied that, but these if I understand correctly, many of these Hindu banks are actually coming up as Nidhis, no? Is it not?
Mutual benefit companies were there from 1970s.
Yeah.
In 2013 Companies Act only this Nidhi came into.
Yeah, I'm very sorry. I have not looked at that in any detail, but thanks for that hint. I will go and look up that. I've not studied that part. The Nidhi question that you're raising, I never paid attention to that to that extent. So I am unable to answer that question. I'm sorry, but I should be able to get back to you.
Thank you very much, sir. I can see at least hundreds of comments in our FB page. One from
I hope-
Abhijit Malik, right? Very enlightening. I was wondering why cooperative subject has been chosen for this occasion. I had my apprehensions, but now I can see through the strategy. Thank you, Comrade Ramakumar.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So comrades, now we are coming to the end of today's webinar. Actually, there is a request to have a Hindi version of today's presentation. At this end of the time, I can only request BEFI headquarters to have a Hindi version of today's presentation and publish it as a booklet. It can be useful and it can be circulated among our comrades in the Hindi speaking areas. Now I request Comrade Chiranjit Ghosh, our Joint Secretary, to propose the formal vote of thanks.
Yes.
To speak in Hindi to a different audience on a different day.
Thank you. Thank you, especially Comrade Dr. Ramakumar for this wonderful speech. I can only say that every time you speak in our webinars, we derive a lot of strength to combat these forces, and that helps us a very big way. I would recapitulate a year back. Last year, as far as I remember, it was 26th of July last year. You addressed a webinar series. So this time also, this series, this speech has definitely given us a lot of material strength to combat these forces, and that has helped it as a very big way. I would also say that last time also, your speech and all in the webinar series last year on this bank nationalization 53rd it was, and this time it's the 54th bank nationalization day. This speech also we intend to have a booklet on this speech, and as Comrade Nandakumar has suggested for the BEFI Center, we will also try to make the Hindi transcription of this speech that will also benefit a larger audience. And in fact, this booklets it gets extensive coverage, and that is also part of the movement. So the Comrade Dr. Ramakumar happens to be a light for our movement, and I thank you for this beautiful speech that you delivered. It has inspired all of us, and I also take the occasion to thank Dr. T.M. Thomas Isaac. Despite his schedule, he was not expected to join this, but he made time to at least make a short speech and give an introduction to Professor Ramakumar's speech, which probably exposed the whole project of this BJP government, the diabolical political agenda of the BJP government to capture the cooperatives or to demolish them and impoverish the people. So with thanking you on behalf of Bank Employees Federation of India, we will continue to take all your services and give us necessary vigor for the continuation of our fight against these policies. And at the same time, I would thank our BEFI Kerala and its media team, who have always been very helpful, and effectively they have been hosting this webinar last year and for subsequently all the webinars. And I thank all the audience who have responded. We are we are sorry that we had restricted it to 100 because it's probably a technical fault that Zoom had to be restricted to 100. At least I hope that those aspirants who wanted to hear your speech, inspired by the speech last year, they had the opportunity to join in the Facebook. I hope they have been able to join the Facebook and participated in this. And with that, I thank all the leaders and all the participants, comrades of this movement. With this, I conclude. Thank you very much, Dr. Ramakumar. Let us meet again another day. Thank you.
Once again, thanking you all for making today's webinar a grand success. Okay, good night to all.